"Sir, I need you to step back behind the chain." The voice was young and precise, and carried the particular authority of someone who has been trained to use it as an instrument. Clipped, impersonal, aimed not at a person, but at a situation to be resolved. Specialist First Class Jordan Petrie was 23 years old, assigned to the 3rd United States Infantry Regiment, and he had been a sentinel at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier for 14 months. He was built for the role in every dimension the role required. 6 feet even, 205 pounds distributed with absolute symmetry. His dress blues so immaculate they appeared to generate their own light. His rifle at carry arms with the ceremonial precision that turns a weapon into a statement. He had performed the Sentinel's walk 4,011 times. He knew every inch of the marble plaza the way a musician knows a well-worn instrument. He did not break routine for anyone. He was breaking it now, but in his mind he was enforcing it. The old man he was addressing had stepped past the black iron chain that separated the public observation area from the ceremonial zone. Not dramatically. Not with any apparent intention to disrupt. He had simply walked forward, slowly and with the careful deliberation of a man managing old knees, until his feet were 6 inches past the chain, and had stopped there, looking at the white marble sarcophagus with an expression that Jordan Petrie could not categorize, and therefore did not attempt to. His name was Francis Doyle, and he was 82 years old. He wore a dark suit that had been good once, and was still good in the way things are good when they have been cared for carefully across many years. Not new, but maintained, the fabric still holding its weave, the jacket buttoned once at the middle. A white shirt. A tie the color of old burgundy wine, knotted simply. No pins on the lapel, no unit patch on the pocket, no visible indicators of any kind. His hair was white and thin and combed flat without fuss. His hands, one at his side, one resting lightly on the chain he had just stepped past without appearing to notice it, were the hands of an 82-year-old man, deeply lined, the knuckles enlarged, the skin loose over the bones. But they were steady, completely, unnervingly steady, the way the hands of very old men are steady when stillness has become their natural condition rather than something they achieve. He did not look at Petrie. He was looking at the tomb. "Sir," Petrie stepped closer, positioning his body in the practiced way of a sentinel maintaining the perimeter without creating a scene. The November air at Arlington was cold and clean, carrying the smell of cut grass and old stone and the faint sweetness of the wreaths laid earlier that morning at the base of the tomb, white carnations and red roses, still fresh, still holding their color against the gray of the November sky. The plaza was occupied by perhaps 60 visitors standing in the designated observation area. Families, school groups, a handful of veterans in caps and pins, several foreign tourists with cameras lowered out of respect. All of them had gone quiet when Petrie had spoken. The routine interruption of the routine was itself a disruption of the ritual, and the crowd felt it. "Sir, the chain marks the ceremonial boundary. I need you to step back, please." Francis Doyle did not step back. He did not, in fact, appear to have heard. He was looking at the inscription on the face of the tomb, the words carved deep into white marble that had weathered through decades and still held. "Here rests, in honored glory, an American soldier, known but to God." He was reading them slowly, or perhaps he was not reading them at all, having long since committed them to something more permanent than memory. Petrie stepped forward to close the remaining distance, moving with the measured economy that his training had produced and that 14 months of performance had refined. He was not angry. He was functioning. The chain was the boundary. The old man was past the chain. The sequence of events from this point was procedural. "Sir," he said, and now there was a slight elevation in the register, not aggressive, but clarifying. This area is restricted during the ceremony. Civilians are required to remain behind the chain at all times. I need you to step back now, or I'll need to ask the MPs to assist. A ripple moved through the crowd. Not sound, a shift in posture, a slight collective lean. An older man in a VFW cap near the middle of the group said something very quietly to the woman beside him. She put her hand on his arm. Petrie reached out and placed 2 fingers lightly on Francis Doyle's sleeve, just above the elbow, the minimum physical contact that the situation appeared to require, and the gray November sky above Arlington vanished. The cold, clean air was gone, replaced in a single dissolved frame by wet heat, the absolute pressurized heat of a Pacific island in August. The kind that did not come from the sun alone, but seemed to rise from the earth itself, from the coral and volcanic rock that had absorbed decades of sun and was returning it all at once. The smell was nothing like Arlington, not grass and old stone and carnations, but the dense mineral richness of jungle undergrowth and standing water, and below it, unmistakable, the iron sweetness of blood. Not distant blood. Close blood. His blood, from the furrow the Japanese rifle round had opened across his left shoulder 2 hours ago. He had packed it with what he had, and kept moving. He was 21 years old. He was a Marine corporal, had been a Marine corporal for 11 months, which felt both like no time and like most of his remembered life, and he was lying prone at the edge of a ridge on a Pacific island that did not appear on the maps most Americans had access to, looking down at an objective that needed to be reached and trying to calculate, with the limited instruments available to a 21-year-old corporal in August 1945, whether he was going to survive reaching it. He had 4 men left. He had started with 12. The 8 who were gone had gone fast and slow, in the manner of things that happen in combat, some of them fast, the instant compressed into a single sound, the man simply there and then not, others slow. The dying extended into minutes that felt like hours. The 21-year-old corporal doing what he could with his hands and his morphine kit, and the absolute inadequacy of both. Corporal Levon Hicks had died at 11 in the morning with his head in Francis's lap, talking about his mother's kitchen in Birmingham, describing the smell of cornbread with a specificity and an urgency that Francis had recognized even then as the mind choosing its final thing to hold. Francis had held Hicks's hand until the talking stopped. Then he had picked up his rifle and moved forward, because the objective still needed to be reached and there was nobody else to reach it. They reached it at 3 in the afternoon with 4 men. The intelligence they recovered from that objective was transmitted to Fleet Command before sundown. The assault that had been planned for the following morning was rerouted based on that transmission. The rerouting saved. The after-action estimates ran from 200 to 300 lives, depending on whose methodology you used. Francis Doyle learned this number 6 years later, at a ceremony he had not known he would be attending until the invitation arrived at his home in Scranton, Pennsylvania, where he had been working since 1946 at a steel fabrication plant. Getting up at 5 in the morning, coming home at 4 in the afternoon, eating dinner with his wife and his 2 daughters, going to bed, and not talking about any of it. He had gone to the ceremony because his wife said he should, and he had received the thing they gave him with his hands perfectly steady and his face perfectly still. And then he had come home and put it in a box in the closet and gone back to work the next morning. The box was in the inside pocket of his suit jacket. He had brought it here today. He was not sure why exactly, only that Arlington had seemed like the right place to bring it, and that the tomb had seemed like the right thing to stand in front of, and that the particular November morning had felt like the particular November morning for doing it. The November air returned. The cold. The smell of grass and old stone and carnations. Petrie's 2 fingers still pressed gently against his sleeve. Francis Doyle looked at those fingers. Then he looked at Petrie, and his eyes, pale blue, the color of a winter sky in the hour before full light, clouded slightly at the edges by age, but carrying a depth behind the cloud that was not diminished by the cloud, the depth of a very cold and very still and very deep body of water, met the young soldier's eyes without flinching. "Son," Francis said. His voice was a low, soft rasp, each word measured and unhurried. "I've been here before." Petrie stared at him for a moment. His training and his 14 months of performance had not given him a protocol for that sentence, and the absence of a protocol was briefly visible on his face. He recovered. "Sir, I understand, but—" "Not as a visitor," Francis said. He turned his eyes back to the tomb. In the VFW cap near the middle of the observation crowd, a retired Army Sergeant Major named Wallace Green was watching the exchange with the specific attention of a man who has learned to read situations quickly and accurately over 4 decades of professional practice. He was 71 years old, compact and gray-haired, with the posture of a man who will never fully stop standing at attention. Because it has been so long, it is simply how he stands. He had noticed Francis Doyle when the old man arrived at the plaza, had noticed the suit, the careful maintenance of it, the absence of pins and patches, the way Doyle moved through the crowd with the unself-conscious directness of a man who has been inside perimeters before and does not experience them as barriers. He had been watching since then. He watched Petrie place his fingers on Francis's sleeve. He watched Francis's face. He had seen that face before, not on Francis Doyle, but on men of that generation, men who carried particular things in a particular way, who had a specific quality of stillness that was not passivity, but compression, the way a very old and very dense material compresses rather than breaks. He had seen it on his own father, who had landed at Omaha Beach and never said a word about it, and who had gone to his grave in 1987 with the compression intact. Wallace Green was already moving quietly toward the edge of the crowd before Petrie finished his second attempt to redirect the old man. He did not push. He worked his way through the gathered visitors with the patience of a man who knows where he needs to be and trusts that he will get there. At the edge of the plaza, he found a uniformed army captain, one of the ceremonial oversight officers, standing at the corner of the observation area and spoke quietly into his ear for approximately 15 seconds. The captain looked at him. He asked one question. Green answered it. The captain's face changed. He reached for the radio on his hip. The radio call that went out in the next 60 seconds moved through the Arlington National Cemetery ceremonial chain with a speed that had nothing to do with normal protocol and everything to do with the name that Green had supplied. It reached the desk of a lieutenant colonel who had been briefed on a very short list of names during his orientation to Arlington the previous year. A list his predecessor had pressed into his hands on his last day with the words, "If any of these men come to the cemetery and anyone gives them trouble, you call me from whatever retirement community I'm in, and I will drive there." The lieutenant colonel made one call up the chain and was told, "Get the Admiral on the radio." Now, Rear Admiral Patricia Sorensen was standing at the far edge of the plaza in full dress uniform. Attending the morning ceremony in an unofficial capacity, she was a personal friend of the family of the service member being interred that day, and she had come to pay respects, not to be recognized. She received the radio call in her earpiece. She listened for 11 seconds. She looked across the plaza to where the young sentinel was attempting, for the third time, to redirect the old man in the dark suit. She began to walk. Back at the chain, Specialist Petrie had escalated to his third stage. He was no longer touching Francis Doyle's sleeve, but he had positioned himself squarely in the old man's sightline, between Francis and the tomb, in the standard perimeter management posture that communicated, without requiring words, that the conversation had reached its terminal point and the next development would involve military police. He was not unkind. He was procedural. He had a ceremony to protect and a perimeter to maintain, and this was what maintaining it looked like. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time," he said, his voice level and precise and carrying the particular gravity of a final warning. "Step back behind the chain, or I'll need to involve the MPs." "I don't want to do that, but I will." Francis Doyle reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. His hand came out holding a small, flat box, navy blue, the color of deep water, the size of a deck of cards. The fabric worn soft by decades inside a closet, and then, for the last 2 weeks, inside the jacket he had pressed 3 times before deciding today was the day. He held it for a moment in his steady, liver-spotted hands. Then he opened it. The Medal of Honor caught the November light. The 5-pointed star on its pale blue ribbon, the color of the sky above Arlington, the eagle at its center, the relief of Minerva cast in bronze. It did not gleam the way new things gleam. It gleamed the way things gleam that have been real for a long time. A deep, muted, certain gleam, the light of something that knows what it is and requires nothing further. Jordan Petrie looked at it. He had seen the Medal of Honor before, in photographs in the museum at Fort Myer, once in a ceremony. He knew exactly what he was looking at. The knowledge arrived in his chest before it arrived in his brain, and his chest processed it correctly before his brain had finished catching up. And the combination produced in him a very specific and total stillness. He stepped aside. He did not know he was going to do it. He simply did it, the way a door opens when the right key is presented, without requiring any deliberate decision from the mechanism. The sound behind him began before he fully registered that he had stepped aside. A low sound from the observation area. Not loud, not theatrical. The sound of 60 people simultaneously drawing breath and then holding it, and underneath that sound, from the VFW cap near the middle of the crowd, the specific weighted silence of a man who was not surprised. Admiral Sorensen had covered half the distance of the plaza at a pace that managed to be urgent without being undignified. She saw Petrie step aside. She saw the box in the old man's hands. She saw the pale blue ribbon and the 5-pointed star. She did not stop. She kept walking, and when she reached the ceremonial zone, she stepped across the chain without breaking stride. And she walked to Francis Doyle, and she stopped in front of him at a distance of 3 feet. And she looked at the medal in his hands, and then at his face. And something moved through her expression that was not entirely professional. It was personal. And it was ancient. The way respect for certain things is personal and ancient, and does not require context. Then Admiral Patricia Sorensen turned to the sergeant of the guard and said, in a voice that was quiet enough that only the people within 10 feet could hear it, but carried the absolute weight of a woman who has never once in her career needed to raise her voice to be obeyed, "Halt the ceremony." The sergeant of the guard looked at her. "Halted," she said. Now the order went through the ceremonial apparatus in under 20 seconds. The relief commander, who had been prepared to begin the changing of the guard, received the command through his earpiece and held. The incoming sentinel stood at parade rest. The crowd, which had been anticipating the ceremony's resumption, went quiet with the particular quality of quiet that follows an unexpected development, in a place where unexpected developments are rare. The plaza at Arlington National Cemetery, on a cold November morning, with the tomb of the unknown soldier standing white and absolute in the gray light and 60 visitors and a scattered formation of ceremonial soldiers and a rear admiral in full-dress uniform, went completely still. Into that stillness, Admiral Sorensen spoke. She did not use a microphone. She did not need one. She spoke in the register of a woman who has given orders in confined spaces and open ones and understands that the voice, used correctly, carries. "My name is Admiral Patricia Sorensen," she said. "I am going to tell you who is standing at this tomb. I am going to do that. Because what is about to happen here, what this man came here to do today, deserves to be witnessed correctly." She reached into her breast pocket and produced a card that her aide, who had been standing at a respectful distance and had heard the radio call in his own earpiece, had pressed into her hand as she crossed the plaza. It was a printed index card, 4 lines of text, prepared from memory because the name Francis James Doyle was on the short list that the Arlington Ceremonial Command maintained for precisely these reasons. "Francis James Doyle," she said. "United States Marine Corps. Corporal, then sergeant then, upon his commission in 1947, lieutenant, and ultimately, upon his retirement in 1967, colonel. 22 years of service. Enlisted 1943 at the age of 19. She paused. First combat deployment, 1944, Central Pacific Theater. Second deployment, 1945, Western Pacific. Third and fourth deployments, Korea, 1950 and 1951. Fifth and sixth deployments, Republic of Vietnam at 1962 and 1964. The school group near the back of the observation area had gone completely motionless. A child of perhaps 9, who had been fidgeting with the zipper of her jacket, was still. "Awards," the Admiral said. "Purple Heart, 1945, sustained during the action for which he subsequently received the citation I am about to read. Silver Star, 1945, for actions in the Pacific Theater. Bronze Star with Valor, 1950, for actions in Korea. And the award he is holding in his hands." She looked at the card. "The Medal of Honor, awarded 1951, for actions in August 1945 on a Pacific island, during which Colonel Doyle, then Corporal Doyle, led a 4-man element following the death or incapacitation of all 8 other members of his unit, reached a critical intelligence objective under direct enemy fire, secured the objective, transmitted the resulting intelligence to Fleet Command despite a gunshot wound to his left shoulder sustained during the approach, and provided the information that led directly to the rerouting of a planned assault, preventing casualties estimated at 200 to 300 American lives." She folded the card. He was 21 years old. The VFW cap in the crowd was off. The man wearing it was holding it against his chest. "Colonel Doyle came to Arlington today," the Admiral said, "to stand at this tomb. He came alone and he came quietly, the way he has done most things in his life. He brought his medal with him. I don't know why he brought it today specifically. I didn't ask, and I won't." She looked at Francis Doyle. "But I know that the men resting in this ground would want him to be able to stand here." She turned to the sentinel. Jordan Petrie was standing at the edge of the ceremonial zone, at a distance of 12 feet, with the specific expression of a young man who has just undergone a thorough and complete recalibration of his understanding of who he is and what he is standing in front of. He was not ashen. He was not crumbling. He was simply, quietly, entirely revised. Admiral Sorensen rendered a salute, precise, complete, directed at Francis James Doyle, Colonel, United States Marine Corps, retired, 82 years old, standing at the tomb of the unknown soldier with a Medal of Honor in his steady, liver-spotted hands. She held it. Petrie, 14 feet away, came to full attention and rendered his own, and this one was different from every salute he had given in 14 months of ceremony, because this one cost him something. And the thing it cost came out in the precision of it, in the way he held it longer than protocol required, in the way his eyes were not the eyes of a man performing a gesture, but of a man meaning. 1. Francis Doyle looked at both salutes. He returned them, one after the other, with the right hand that had been steady for 8 decades. The ceremony resumed 5 minutes later. Petrie walked his post with the measured, perfect cadence that 42 paces one way and 42 paces back had inscribed into him across 4,000 times. He walked it differently than he had ever walked it before, not in the mechanics, which were identical, but in the interior architecture of what he was doing while he did it. He understood something now that the training had told him, but that the morning had shown him. The ceremony was not the performance. The ceremony was the statement, and statements only mean what the person making them understands them to mean. The formal review that followed was handled without drama, a counseling conversation, not a reprimand, between Petrie's commanding officer and Petrie himself, in which the commanding officer sat across from the young soldier and explained, quietly and without theater, the protocol that existed for Medal of Honor recipients at national military cemeteries, and why it existed, and what it said about the nation that had written it. Petrie listened. He asked 2 questions. The CO answered both. That was the entire proceeding. Francis Doyle spent 40 minutes at the tomb after the Admiral left. He stood where he had wanted to stand, and he looked at the words carved in white marble, and he did whatever it was he had come here to do. No one approached him. No one interrupted. The sentinels walked their post around him with the precise, measured cadence of the ceremony, and he was part of the space they were guarding, and that was correct. When he finally turned to leave, Jordan Petrie was waiting at the edge of the ceremonial zone. He was not there officially. His duty rotation had ended. He had changed out of his dress blues into his service uniform and come back, which had taken him 22 minutes. He was standing with his cover in his hands, turning it in a slow rotation between his fingers the way people handle things when they are trying to find the right words. Francis Doyle walked toward him and stopped. "Sir," Petrie said, "I owe you an apology." He said it without decoration, without defense, without the soft padding of qualifications. "I looked at you and I saw a man pass the chain and I handled it by the procedure. I didn't look at you. I looked at the situation." He paused. "I should have looked at you." Francis looked at him with those pale blue eyes. "You did your job," Francis said quietly. "There's no apology owed for doing your job." He paused. He looked at the young soldier with the measuring patience of a man who has had a long time to learn the difference between error and character. "You walked back out here on your own time. That's the part that matters." Petrie nodded. He was holding himself very still in the manner of young men who are feeling something significant and are not entirely sure what to do with the feeling. "Keep walking your post," Francis said. He placed his hand briefly on the young soldier's shoulder, a brief, light contact, the hand of 82 years resting on the shoulder of 23. "Every step you take out there is for them." He tilted his head slightly toward the tomb. "Don't let anyone forget it." He walked toward the parking area at the pace of a man with the rest of the afternoon ahead of him, and no particular urgency about how it was spent. 6 weeks later, at a small Veterans Day gathering in Scranton, Pennsylvania, held in the fellowship hall of a church that had been hosting the same event for 30 years, Jordan Petrie walked through the door in his service uniform and looked around the room until he found the man in the dark suit near the back, sitting alone with a cup of coffee and the particular settled stillness of a man who is precisely where he wanted to be. He walked over. Francis Doyle looked up. Petrie sat down across from him without being invited, which Francis apparently found acceptable because he did not say anything about it. "I looked up the action," Petrie said, "the 1945 operation. As much as I could find. The declassified parts." He paused. "I read about Corporal Hicks." Francis was quiet for a moment. He looked at his coffee. "Levon," he said. "Yes, sir, he would have been a good father," Francis said. "He talked about his kids the whole way. Kids he didn't have yet. He'd already named them. He was quiet again. Sometimes I think the ones who didn't come back are why the ones who did have to keep showing up. Keep being present. Keep doing whatever small thing the day requires. He looked at Petrie with those pale blue eyes. So they don't have to be forgotten twice. Neither of them said anything for a while. The fellowship hall made its quiet sounds around them. Conversation, the clink of cups, the particular warmth of a room full of people who have come to remember something together. The November light through the windows was the same flat, honest gray as the light above Arlington 6 weeks earlier. Francis finished his coffee. "Good man," he said, to Petrie, or to Hicks, or to no one in particular. It was not entirely clear, and possibly it did not need to be. He stood and moved through the room with the quiet, unhurried pace of a man who has been present in many rooms and understood that presence, simply and completely, is the whole thing. There are men like Francis Doyle in fellowship halls and church pews and park benches across this country right now, wearing dark suits that have been carefully maintained, carrying small flat boxes in their inside pockets, standing in lines at the grocery store and sitting in the back rows of their grandchildren's school plays, and they do not tell you what they carry, and they do not require you to know, and the only way you would ever find out is to look. Really look at the steadiness of the hands and the depth behind the eyes and the quality of the stillness, which is not the stillness of people who have nothing to say, but of people who understood, somewhere in a very long time ago, that the saying of it changes nothing essential and the carrying of it was always the point. They showed up when they were called. They kept showing up after. Every day, quietly. They still do. If you were moved by Francis's story of quiet courage and unbroken service, hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe to Veterans Valor for more stories of America's unassuming heroes. Word count, approximately 4,100 words.